$93 million in payments, 17 sworn officers, the protection network that moved 8 of 4 tons of fentanyl into your community.
At 4:17 a.m. on March 8th, under the suffocating stillness of Miami's pre-dawn darkness, 17 black SUVs converged on a palatial waterfront estate in Coral Gables. No sirens, no warning, just the synchronized click of tactical gear and the measured breathing of federal agents who had spent 9 months preparing for this moment. Through night vision optics, they watched the mansion's surveillance cameras pan across manicured lawns, unaware that every rotation had been mapped, every blind spot cataloged. Inside, behind walls that had hosted charity galas and political fundraisers, evidence of a betrayal so profound it would dismantle the very concept of law enforcement in South Florida was waiting to be discovered. The lead agent, a 23-year FBI veteran, would later admit he expected drugs, maybe weapons. What they found instead would expose a corruption network stretching from Miami-Dade County Sheriff's offices directly into the operational headquarters of Mexico's Sinaloa cartel. Federal agents from the FBI, DEA, and Homeland Security investigations executed simultaneous warrants across 14 locations that morning, targeting what the Department of Justice would call the most sophisticated law enforcement corruption scheme in United States history. Operation Silent Shield, as it was designated, had originated from a single anomaly detected by Treasury Department analysts 18 months earlier. A routine financial audit flagged unusual patterns in property seizure records. Assets confiscated during drug busts were being logged correctly, processed through proper channels, then disappearing into administrative voids. The discrepancies were minor at first. $10,000 here, a vehicle there. But forensic accountants following the digital trail discovered something that stopped them cold. Over a 4-year period, $1.4 billion in seized narcotics, cash, and property had been systematically diverted, repackaged, and funneled back into cartel distribution networks. And the authorization signatures on every diversion order belonged to sworn law enforcement officers. The mansion where agents now positioned breaching equipment wasn't owned by a cartel lieutenant or even a high-level trafficker. Property records listed the owner as Deputy Chief Marcus Trevino, a decorated 28-year veteran of the Miami-Dade Sheriff's Office, recipient of 3 commendations for valor, and the public face of the department's anti-narcotics task force. His official salary was $87,000 annually. The estate agent surrounded was valued at $12.3 million. It featured private beach access, a helicopter pad, and a yacht docked at a pier outfitted with military-grade communication jamming equipment. To colleagues, Trevino was a dedicated public servant who worked late hours and volunteered at youth programs. To investigators analyzing encrypted communications intercepted through a classified NSA partnership, he was Coordinator 7, the Miami hub operator for a network that had embedded 17 law enforcement officers across 6 departments into cartel infrastructure. At 4:41 a.m., the breach teams moved. The front door, reinforced steel disguised as ornate mahogany, required shaped charges to compromise. The explosion shattered the pre-dawn silence, and within 8 seconds, 42 agents flooded through 6 entry points simultaneously. Trevino was detained in a 3rd-floor bedroom, his service weapon on the nightstand, his phone displaying an encrypted messaging app that would provide prosecutors with 2,000 pages of communications detailing shipment schedules, protection payments, and the identities of every compromised officer in his network. In the mansion's basement, behind a wine cellar containing bottles worth $200,000, agents discovered a concealed operations center. 6 computer terminals monitored real-time police dispatch channels across 3 counties. Digital maps displayed ongoing DEA surveillance operations with cartel distribution routes overlaid in red, allowing traffickers to navigate around federal interdiction efforts with surgical precision. A wall-mounted screen cycled through live feeds from law enforcement evidence storage facilities, providing real-time inventory of seized contraband available for diversion. But that was only the beginning. In a climate-controlled vault accessed through a biometric scanner keyed to Trevino's fingerprint, investigators found a physical ledger of corruption. 17 personnel files, each containing photographs, financial records, and detailed dossiers on active law enforcement officers across Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach counties. The files documented recruitment methods, payment schedules, and operational protocols. One deputy sheriff had received $4.2 million over 6 years. A detective in the organized crime unit earned $7,000 per advance warning about impending raids. A sergeant in evidence management was paid by the kilogram for every brick of cocaine he failed to log into official inventory systems. The network's internal accounting meticulously maintained in encrypted cloud servers that FBI cyber specialists would spend 11 days cracking revealed total payouts to corrupted officers exceeding $93 million since 2019. The sophistication of the operation stunned even veteran organized crime investigators. Cartel leadership hadn't simply bribed officers. They had systematically identified vulnerabilities, financial stress, gambling debts, marital problems, medical bills, and tailored recruitment approaches with corporate precision. One officer drowning in his daughter's leukemia treatment costs received an anonymous payment to the hospital, followed by a burner phone and instructions. Another, facing foreclosure after a divorce, found his mortgage mysteriously satisfied, then discovered surveillance photos of his children with a note offering continued protection. The recruitment materials recovered from Trevino's encrypted drives included psychological profiles and manipulation strategies that read like intelligence agency operational manuals. This wasn't opportunistic corruption. It was a deliberate, methodical infiltration of law enforcement infrastructure by an organization that understood American institutional weaknesses better than most Americans. If this investigation shocks you, if the scale of this betrayal makes your blood run cold, hit the like button right now. This story represents a threat to every community in America, and it needs to reach every citizen who believes their safety depends on incorruptible law enforcement. Type exposed in the comments if you think the families of these officers should face asset forfeiture. This isn't just about punishment. It's about accountability that reaches every beneficiary of blood money. Simultaneously, as breach teams secured Trevino's mansion, coordinated raids executed at 4:41 a.m. targeted the other 16 officers. Agents hit a Homestead townhouse where a patrol sergeant kept $300,000 cash in duffel bags and maintained a second encrypted phone exclusively for cartel communications. They raided a Pompano Beach condo owned by a detective whose official duties included testifying in drug trafficking trials, testimony that had, investigators would prove, been deliberately undermined in 47 cases to secure acquittals for cartel-connected defendants. In West Palm Beach, a SWAT team lieutenant who had provided tactical training to fellow officers was arrested while his wife and children slept upstairs, unaware that the family's vacation home in the Bahamas and the private school tuition were financed by an organization responsible for 70,000 opioid deaths annually in the United States. The real scope of devastation became clear as forensic accountants and intelligence analysts pieced together the operational timeline. Between January 2019 and March 2024, the corrupted network had actively sabotaged 214 federal and state drug investigations. Raids were tipped off hours in advance, allowing traffickers to relocate product and sanitize facilities. Witness identities were leaked, resulting in the murders of at least 9 confidential informants whose bodies were discovered in abandoned properties across South Florida, each execution bearing the signature brutality of cartel enforcement. Evidence was contaminated, mishandled, or simply disappeared from chain of custody, collapsing prosecutions that had taken years to build. 163 defendants, traffickers moving fentanyl, methamphetamine, and cocaine through Miami's ports, walked free because of evidence that was later proven to have been deliberately compromised by officers on cartel payrolls. The human cost extended far beyond collapse cases. The network's protection allowed a distribution operation that federal prosecutors estimate delivered 84 tons of narcotics into American communities over 5 years. Those drugs, predominantly fentanyl and methamphetamine, contributed to an estimated 12,000 overdose deaths across 17 states, according to epidemiological models presented at trial. Families destroyed, children orphaned, communities devastated, and every shipment moved under the protective umbrella of badges and authority that citizens had been taught to trust without question. In one particularly horrifying case detailed in court documents, a corrupted officer provided advance warning of a DEA raid targeting a processing facility in Hialeah. The traffickers evacuated but left behind 3 Venezuelan women, victims of human trafficking forced to package drugs under threat of violence. When federal agents breached the facility 18 minutes later, all 3 women had been executed to eliminate witnesses. They were aged 19, 22, and 23. The investigation expanded beyond Florida's borders as FBI field offices followed financial trails and communication networks. Bank accounts in the Cayman Islands received wire transfers from shell corporations registered in Delaware and Wyoming, then dispersed funds through cryptocurrency exchanges that converted dirty money into untraceable digital assets before reconversion into cashier's checks deposited in the corrupted officers' accounts. The money laundering infrastructure involved 17 separate financial institutions, 43 shell companies, and coordination with professional facilitators, including 3 attorneys, 2 accountants, and a real estate broker who specialized in purchasing luxury properties for clients who never appeared on ownership documents. Asset forfeiture proceedings would eventually seize $217 million in property, vehicles, jewelry, and financial holdings from the officers and their immediate families, though prosecutors acknowledged the actual amount diverted was likely triple that figure, much of it already moved beyond recovery. What started as a financial audit anomaly became the largest single law enforcement corruption prosecution in Justice Department history. The operation's codename, Silent Shield, reflected the insidious nature of the betrayal. These weren't criminals masquerading as police. They were police who had transformed their sworn duty into a criminal enterprise, using the very authority granted to protect citizens as a weapon to enable those who preyed upon them. The investigation required unprecedented secrecy, with FBI leadership restricting knowledge to a core team of 11 agents who reported directly to Washington to prevent any possibility of leaks through compromised channels. Even the judges who authorized surveillance warrants were selected from outside Florida's federal district to eliminate potential connections to the targeted officers. Share this video immediately. Subscribe and turn on notifications because stories like this are systematically suppressed by algorithms that prioritize entertainment over existential threats to public safety. Comment betrayal if you believe every law enforcement agency in America should undergo mandatory financial audits with external oversight. The only way to prevent replication of this network in other cities is public pressure demanding accountability infrastructure that doesn't currently exist. By 6:30 a.m. on March 8th, all 17 officers were in federal custody, processed through a secure facility in Fort Lauderdale with media blackout protocols to prevent interference with ongoing aspects of the investigation. The initial court appearances were sealed, with public disclosure delayed 72 hours, while federal agents executed search warrants on safety deposit boxes, storage units, and secondary properties identified through financial records. Those searches yielded an additional $41 million in currency, 12 kilograms of cocaine packaged in evidence bags bearing official police department markings, and documentation linking the network to 3 additional officers who had not appeared in Trevino's vault, but who communications records placed within the conspiracy's outer ring. The trials, conducted over 8 months in 2024 and early 2025, presented juries with overwhelming evidence. Prosecutors introduced over 14,000 pages of encrypted communications, financial records documenting every payment, testimony from cartel cooperators who identified specific officers by photograph and described their roles in protection operations, and digital forensics proving that official law enforcement databases had been accessed to provide intelligence directly to trafficking organizations. The defense strategy, repeated across multiple trials, attempted to frame the accused as victims of sophisticated cartel entrapment. It failed comprehensively. Jurors deliberated for an average of 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on charges including racketeering, conspiracy to distribute narcotics, obstruction of justice, and violations of the RICO Act. Sentencing reflected the magnitude of betrayal. Marcus Trevino received 47 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. The remaining 16 officers received sentences ranging from 18 to 39 years. 5 additional defendants connected to the money laundering infrastructure received terms between 9 and 15 years. Asset forfeiture stripped families of properties, vehicles, and financial accounts, leaving some spouses and children who claimed ignorance destitute, a consequence prosecutors argued was both legally justified and morally necessary. Blood money, they stated in court filings, conveys no legitimate ownership regardless of who holds it. The children who attended private schools on cartel financing were no more entitled to those funds than the families of overdose victims were entitled to compensation from unreachable criminal enterprises. The institutional aftermath proved as significant as the criminal consequences. The Miami-Dade Sheriff's Office underwent complete administrative restructuring, with external auditors from the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division implementing mandatory financial disclosure requirements, random polygraph examinations, and psychological evaluations designed to identify vulnerability to corruption. The changes, mandated by a federal consent decree, extended to every department in South Florida, creating accountability infrastructure that had been absent despite decades of sporadic corruption cases. The DEA revised protocols for multi-agency task forces, implementing compartmentalized information structures that prevent any single local officer from accessing comprehensive operational intelligence. The reforms represented acknowledgement of an uncomfortable truth. The threat wasn't external infiltration. It was internal vulnerability, exploited by organizations sophisticated enough to identify and manipulate the fracture points in American law enforcement. Yet even as reforms were implemented and sentences served, troubling questions lingered. How many similar networks operate in cities where financial audits haven't detected anomalies? How many ongoing investigations are compromised by officers whose corruption hasn't yet surfaced? The FBI's Assistant Director for Criminal Investigations testified before Congress that Operation Silent Shield should be understood not as an isolated anomaly, but as a template that organized crime has likely replicated wherever opportunities exist. Cartels don't respect borders, and they study institutions with intelligence capabilities that rival nation-states. For every network discovered, how many remain operational, hidden behind badges and oaths that citizens have no choice but to trust? The families of the 9 murdered informants received no closure beyond knowing their loved ones' killers were prosecuted. The 3 Venezuelan women executed in Hialeah were buried in unmarked graves, their families in South America never notified, their existence reduced to footnotes in prosecutorial filings. The 12,000 Americans whose overdose deaths were statistically linked to narcotics moved under this network's protection, left behind parents, siblings, and children who will never know that sworn officers facilitated the poison that destroyed their families. This is the human cost of corruption. Not abstract statistics, but individual lives extinguished because people granted extraordinary authority chose profit over duty. $1.4 billion, 17 sworn officers, 214 sabotaged investigations, 12,000 estimated deaths. These numbers should haunt every American who assumes safety is guaranteed by institutions rather than by the integrity of individuals within those institutions. The badge is a symbol, nothing more. It conveys no inherent morality, no automatic trustworthiness. It is a tool, and tools can be wielded for protection or for predation. Operation Silent Shield proved that some of those sworn to protect had chosen to prey, transforming their authority into a weapon pointed at the communities they had vowed to serve. Like this video. Comment accountability if you believe financial transparency should be mandatory for every law enforcement officer above patrol level. Subscribe because understanding the threats hidden in plain sight is the only defense against systems designed to exploit blind trust. Share this with everyone who needs to understand that the uniform doesn't guarantee the person wearing it has earned the respect it demands. In the suffocating stillness of that March morning in Miami, federal agents didn't just raid a mansion. They exposed the darkness that lives within institutions we're taught never to question. The question isn't whether more networks like this exist. The question is whether we'll demand the accountability infrastructure to find them before they find us.